Nobody expected Barron Trump to show up that morning. The Congressional Forum on Economic Equity had already drawn cameras because Jasmine Crockett was scheduled to testify. But when Barron walked into the chamber, tall, composed, flanked by a small entourage of media handlers, it felt like someone had quietly cracked open a side door to let in a brewing storm. He took his seat at the panel table with the ease of someone who had grown up breathing the rarefied air of privilege. Even at 20-something, he carried the peculiar confidence that came from never hearing the word no said without apology. Jasmine didn't look up right away. She was reviewing her notes, highlighter uncapped, her mind 1,000 miles ahead of whatever spectacle he thought he'd come to create. But everyone else was watching. The reporters in the back row shifted forward in their chairs. The producer from C-SPAN mouthed "keep rolling," and the room settled into that electrified hush you only get when an ambush is about to unfold. The chairman tapped his mic. "We'll begin with opening remarks. Mr. Trump, you requested to address the committee." Barron adjusted the mic with a precise flick of his fingers. His voice was smooth, almost casual. "I appreciate the opportunity. I just think it's important to question whether some of the voices shaping this policy are truly qualified to speak on behalf of everyday Americans." He didn't look at her directly. He didn't have to. A single eyebrow lifted above Jasmine's dark eyes. She set her highlighter down with a soft click, her expression unreadable. Barron continued, tone syrupy with polite disdain. "Because when I hear Representative Crockett talk about economic hardship, I wonder, has she ever actually built anything? Has she ever signed a paycheck? Or is this all just academic theater?" A collective gasp rippled across the audience. Somewhere in the back, a young intern exhaled "oh my God" under her breath. Jasmine finally lifted her gaze, slow and deliberate, until it locked onto him like a spotlight. In that instant, every person in the chamber knew she wasn't going to let this pass. What Barron didn't realize was that he had just delivered her the perfect invitation, one she was more than ready to accept. For a heartbeat, nobody spoke. Barron settled back in his chair, fingers tented, as if he'd just dropped a clever line in a college debate. To him, this was theater, another moment to prove that pedigree trumped experience. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She reached for her water, unscrewed the cap, and took a sip so calmly you'd think he'd asked her about the weather. When she set the bottle down, her voice was steady, but every syllable carried the crackle of something electric. "Mr. Trump," she began, "I'm glad you asked." The room straightened in collective anticipation. Even the chairman stopped rifling through his paperwork. "You're curious about whether I've built anything," she continued. "Let me clarify." Her eyes didn't leave his face. "I built a legal practice from the ground up, without a trust fund, without a famous last name, and without the safety net of generational wealth cushioning every mistake." A ripple of low murmurs threaded through the gallery. Barron's jaw shifted, but he didn't interrupt. "I've represented people who worked 2 jobs and still had to choose between paying rent and buying asthma medication for their kids," Jasmine went on, her voice tightening just enough to let you hear the edge. "And I've signed more paychecks than you've likely signed autographs." A muffled laugh escaped one of the aides, quickly stifled by a cough. Barron's confident posture wavered, just for a second. "But let's talk about credentials," Jasmine said. Her tone didn't rise, but the gravity in it made the air feel heavy. "I didn't inherit my platform. I earned it in courtrooms and community centers, places you've never been and, judging by your remarks, would struggle to understand." A flush crept up his neck. "And while you were learning how to pose for cameras," she finished, "some of us were learning how to stand up for people who don't get a microphone." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was respect. And Barron, for the first time in the hearing, didn't have a single word to say. A producer near the back glanced at her cameraman, lips moving without sound, "Keep rolling." Jasmine didn't so much as glance at the cameras. She leaned forward just enough that Barron had no choice but to meet her eyes. "You asked if I've ever built anything," she said again, her tone softer now, almost conversational, like she was explaining something to a stubborn child. I built a reputation on showing up when it's inconvenient. On taking calls at midnight from constituents who can't afford an attorney or a lobbyist. On writing legislation to protect the same working families you're so eager to dismiss. Her hand rested flat on the stack of folders in front of her, steady as bedrock. I know you think your name makes you credible, she continued, but here's the truth, credibility isn't inherited. It's demonstrated. And nothing you've said today suggests you understand the first thing about what that takes. For a heartbeat, you could see something flicker in Barron's face, recognition, maybe, that he was in deeper water than he'd planned. A reporter in the front row scribbled frantically, trying to capture every word. And you know, Jasmine went on, her voice dipping even lower, I actually appreciate your question. Because you just proved exactly why I'm here. Barron shifted in his chair, trying to reassert the smooth composure that had carried him in. Jasmine didn't budge. People in this country are tired, she said, her gaze still locked on his. Tired of watching the children of billionaires pretend their opinions weigh more than the lived experience of everyone else. The chairman looked up, eyebrows lifted. They're tired of the entitlement, Jasmine said. And they're tired of the arrogance. A hush fell so complete you could almost hear the hum of the recording equipment. And if that makes you uncomfortable, she finished, voice calm as ever, I'd suggest you sit with it. Because discomfort is how we grow. She leaned back in her chair. And Barron Trump, who had walked in thinking he could embarrass her, looked like he'd just realized he was the one being schooled. Barron cleared his throat. For the first time, his gaze darted to the cameras, as if searching for a sympathetic lens. But none came. Jasmine didn't break eye contact. She was done giving him the luxury of soft landings. You know, she continued, her voice smooth as polished glass, when I was sworn into Congress, I promised my district one thing, I wouldn't waste their time trying to impress people who never planned to listen. Her tone was almost gentle. Almost. So you can question my credentials all you want, she said. It doesn't change the fact that while you were learning to smile for a photo op, I was learning to keep single mothers from losing their homes. Barron opened his mouth, then closed it again, the words catching like fish bones in his throat. And let's be clear about something, Jasmine went on. Privilege doesn't disqualify you from caring about other people. But it does make it easier to pretend their problems are theoretical. A hush tightened around the committee room. You could feel it pressing on every shoulder. And you can call that academic theater if it helps you sleep at night, she said. But the people I serve don't have the luxury of performance. Their lives are not props for your political ambitions. She folded her hands neatly, her posture composed, her eyes unwavering. They are real, Jasmine said quietly. And they deserve better than this. Barron shifted again, his polished demeanor cracking in tiny, unmistakable ways. The flush that had crept up his neck was now creeping higher, visible even from the back row. A producer whispered to her colleague, she's ending his career in real time. But Jasmine didn't look triumphant. She looked like someone who had waited her whole life for the chance to say this, calmly, clearly, without fear of retribution. And she wasn't finished. Barron drew in a shallow breath, like he was about to fire back with some prepackaged retort. But Jasmine lifted a hand, a small, quiet gesture that somehow felt like the final word before he'd even spoken. I know exactly how this will play out, she said, her tone measured, almost weary. Tomorrow, there will be editorials calling me emotional or combative. There will be headlines suggesting I overreacted to a simple question. She tilted her head slightly, studying him like she was cataloging every excuse he hadn't even voiced yet. But what you did today wasn't a question, she continued. It was a performance designed to belittle me in front of the American people. It was an attempt to shrink my experience into something small enough to dismiss. Her voice softened, not out of kindness, but out of the unshakable calm of someone who had survived worse than a rich boy's condescension. And if you think I don't recognize that strategy, she added, then you've underestimated me more than I realized. Barron's polished mask slipped, just for an instant. His mouth parted, and he looked like he might say I didn't mean, but the words never came. Jasmine leaned in, her voice a low, steady current. You asked what I've built, she said. I've built a life that doesn't revolve around whether people like you approve of it. A sharp exhale escaped from somewhere in the press gallery. No one tried to cover it up. I've built trust with people who have never been given the benefit of the doubt, Jasmine went on. I've built credibility that can't be inherited or faked. Her gaze was steady as a blade. And you can try to question that, she finished, but you can't erase it. She leaned back, hands folded, expression unshaken. Barron swallowed hard, looking down at his notes, like maybe he'd finally realized none of them would save him now. For a moment, no one moved. The hush that settled over the hearing room wasn't just awkward, it was absolute. A silence heavy enough that everyone could feel the weight of it pressing in their lungs. Barron Trump slowly lifted his gaze, trying to reassemble the persona he'd carried in with him. But the damage was done. He looked smaller now. Less certain. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't even shift in her chair. Instead, she reached for the stack of papers in front of her and began flipping through them, methodical, unhurried, like she'd already decided this conversation was over. But she wasn't finished yet. Before you leave here today, she said, her voice quiet but firm, I want you to understand something. Her eyes flicked back up, locking on his with an intensity that made a couple of aides instinctively glance away. You're not the first person to assume I was here to decorate a panel, she continued. Or to assume that I'd sit politely while you questioned my right to speak. Her thumb tapped the edge of the folder. Once. Twice. A soft, steady rhythm. And you won't be the last, she said. But you should know, every time someone like you tries to make me smaller, it only proves why I had to fight twice as hard to be here. Barron's jaw flexed, but the words still wouldn't come. And I'm not ashamed of that, Jasmine added. Because everything I built knowing it would be challenged by people who never had to build anything at all. Someone in the gallery exhaled, a quiet, almost reverent sound. And that's what you can't understand, she said, her voice dropping even lower, almost like a confession. You think this is about credentials, about titles. But it's not. It's about whether you have the courage to show up for people who don't look like you, don't vote like you, and don't have the luxury of forgetting what struggle feels like. Her hand rested flat against the folder. And in case it wasn't clear, Jasmine finished, I do. The hush held. And Barron, blinking too fast, didn't look quite so sure of his place anymore. For a long heartbeat, the only sound was the camera's clicking, capturing every angle of the moment Barron Trump realized he'd miscalculated. Jasmine inhaled slowly, as if she was taking in the hush like oxygen. She didn't look angry. She looked resolute. You know, she said finally, her tone conversational again, when I was growing up, my mother used to say that some people will always confuse your calm with weakness. She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of aides, reporters, even the chairman, who was now watching with his hands folded in front of his lips. She told me, Jasmine went on, don't ever give them the satisfaction of seeing you rattled. Because they don't respect you more when you shrink. Her gaze returned to Barron. That's why I don't shrink, she said. That's why I don't apologize for taking up space here. Barron shifted in his chair, jaw tightening. But this time he didn't try to speak. He just watched her, maybe hoping she'd finally run out of things to say. She hadn't. You can call this a performance, Jasmine said, her voice dipping into something quieter, and somehow more dangerous. But what you're watching is someone who didn't inherit a platform learning how to use it. Her hand moved to the microphone, fingertips resting lightly against the base as if grounding herself. And when you try to undermine me, you're not just questioning my experience, she continued. You're questioning every person who ever sat in a folding chair at a town hall, wondering if their story mattered. The silence was absolute. "And if you think I'm going to let that go unchallenged," she finished, "you haven't been paying attention." Someone in the gallery, young, maybe a student, whispered, "Damn," under her breath. Jasmine didn't even blink. Barron's hand hovered near his stack of prepared notes like he was about to grab for them, some final talking point, some pre-written deflection. But his fingers didn't move. Because by then, everyone could see the truth, the script he came with didn't fit the moment anymore. Jasmine let that realization hang there. Not to humiliate him, but to make sure it landed. Her voice was softer when she spoke again, but it carried farther than any shout. "I didn't come here to argue with you," she said. "I came here to represent the people who never get to sit at this table." Her eyes stayed locked on his, unblinking. "The single mom working 2 jobs who still can't afford childcare," she continued. "The retired teacher whose pension is worth half of what she was promised. The young man who's never known a day without medical debt." Each sentence landed like a steady drumbeat. "You can try to frame this as some political performance," she said. "But you don't get to erase the reality those people live just because it doesn't fit your narrative." Barron's jaw worked, but no sound came out. "And you know what?" Jasmine went on, her voice almost gentle now. "If you're uncomfortable, that's good. It means you're finally feeling even a fraction of what they feel every day." The chairman shifted in his seat, looking like he was about to intervene, but he didn't. Jasmine's fingers tapped the microphone again. "I didn't spend my life fighting to be tolerated in these rooms," she said quietly. "I spent it fighting to be heard." And in that moment, calm, unflinching, she was heard more clearly than any headline or sound bite could ever capture. Barron lowered his gaze to the table. For once, he had nothing left to say. The hush that followed wasn't just silence. It was a reckoning. Reporters scribbled so fast their pens slipped across their notepads. A young woman in the gallery wiped her eyes without trying to hide it. Even the chairman seemed to hesitate, as if searching for the right way to move on without pretending nothing had just happened. But Jasmine didn't need applause. She didn't need a cue to stop. She took a slow breath, her gaze drifting over the rows of spectators, some of whom had likely walked in expecting her to fold under pressure. Instead, she looked more certain than ever. "Before this hearing ends," she said, her tone warm but edged and iron, "I want to say something for the record." Barron didn't look up. He didn't have to. The entire room was listening. "When you question the legitimacy of someone's experience," Jasmine said, "you reveal more about your own limitations than theirs." Her eyes found the cameras, red lights blinking, broadcasting every word live. "You show the country that you think credibility can only be bought, inherited, or performed," she continued. "But credibility isn't a birthright. It's earned. And it's measured by whether you stand up when it counts." Someone in the press row whispered, "This is going viral." Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't soften her voice. "And if you think I spent my life to get here just to let your doubt define me," she said, "you were never paying attention." Barron's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked exactly his age, a young man who thought his last name would shield him from every consequence. Jasmine drew in one final, steadying breath. And she was ready to finish what she'd started. Jasmine placed both hands flat on the table. She didn't need her notes anymore. Her voice was low and sure, the kind of tone that didn't need volume to command the entire room. "I'm not here to entertain your skepticism," she said, her gaze fixed on Barron. "I'm here because there are people who have never had a champion in places like this." Her words struck something deeper than outrage, something closer to recognition. "And you can scoff," she continued, "but that won't erase the reality that for millions of Americans, survival isn't theoretical. It's daily." A muscle worked along Barron's jaw, but he didn't raise his eyes again. Jasmine's voice softened, almost to a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. "You don't have to respect me," she said. "But you will respect what I represent." She let the sentence breathe, the air thick with the understanding that he could never take that away from her. Then she leaned back in her chair, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "This hearing isn't about whether you believe I belong here," she said. "It's about whether you're prepared to face the truth about who this system was built for, and who it leaves behind." She glanced briefly at the chairman, signaling she was finished. And in that moment, it didn't matter how many cameras were rolling. She had spoken for everyone who never got the chance. Everyone knew it. Even Barron Trump. When Jasmine Crockett finally stepped away from that table, the room didn't erupt in noise. It didn't have to. Because what she had done wasn't about spectacle, it was about truth. Truth that didn't need to shout to be undeniable. She walked out of that hearing with her head high, her words still echoing in the silence she left behind. And no matter what headline spun or what talking head said later, everyone who watched, live or on a screen, knew exactly what had happened. A young man with every advantage tried to question her worth. And she didn't just defend herself. She reminded the country that credibility isn't something you inherit, it's something you prove, over and over, in rooms just like this. If you felt that truth today, if you saw yourself or someone you love in Jasmine's story, remember. Your voice matters, too. And when you speak it, calmly, bravely, no one can take it from you. That's not just politics. That's power.